All right, Nathan McGrath is president and general counsel at the Fairness Center, where he oversees the firm's general operations and litigation. He's also a Pennsylvania Advisory Committee member with the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Prior to joining the Fairness Center, Nathan was a staff attorney with the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, where he practiced constitutional law, labor, and administrative law. Nathan was also an associate attorney with Lawler and Lawler PC, a general practice firm in Pittsburgh. Nathan received his law degree from Regent University School of Law. As many of you know, Regent, that's where Grove City College's next president is going to come from, Dr. Brad Lingo. He was a member of Regent's Law Review and Trial Advocacy Board. During law school, he also spent 2 years as a judicial intern for a judge on the Virginia Court of Appeals. Prior to law school, Nathan worked as a policy advisor for a member of Congress, where Nathan handled, among other issues, the member's labor policy. Nathan received his undergraduate degree from Grove City College in 2004, and he is from Titusville, Pennsylvania. Please help me welcoming Nathan to the stage.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I actually was a little bit surprised today because I didn't know this was happening, but Dr. Lyle and Mrs. Lyle came today. Dr. Lyle I played soccer for at Grove City College, and then my other soccer coach, Mike Dreves, is also here. So I feel like the pressure's been turned up a little bit. I might owe them laps or push-ups afterwards. I don't know. If you see me sweating in the parking lot afterwards, that's what happened. But anyway, it's great to see so many friends here. Thank you guys for coming out. For a topic that I think is interesting, I've devoted most of my life to it, really, public sector unions and employees and kind of the dynamic between all of that. And I think hopefully today, at the end of the day, what you get out of it is you see how kind of a really small segment of the population, public sector unions and their officials, really have a very large impact on our country, culture, and society. That's kind of our big idea, our big picture, what we're going for here today. So it's an interesting area of law, just to give you kind of an idea of why I do it. Not many people have ever heard of our area of law. In fact, I'm sure many of you have grandkids or children yourself that, they do the my first day of school, I want to be, no one puts down labor attorney, I guarantee you. You've probably never seen that on Facebook or Instagram, Cart, whatever that thing is, anything like that. So not many people dream of doing this. I fell into it accidentally or providentially, whatever you want to say there. But why I've stayed and why I care about it so much is because the issues that we get to deal with have to do oftentimes with the First Amendment, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and we are like in the trenches dealing with folks that really have a big influence and, like I said, a big impact on culture and society. So that's why I do what I do, and hopefully through today you'll kind of see what I mean by that. And again, we're just going to kind of skim the surface on a lot of this just to give you an idea. Maybe we can go deeper in Q&A or something like that. But I just want to set the stage for you, right, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So a couple months ago, a colleague and I were in Pennsylvania for doing oral argument before the PA Supreme Court, beautiful chambers downtown Pittsburgh. And our client, who was a state employee from Central PA, she was up against AFSCME Council 13, one of the largest public sector unions in Pennsylvania. And what had happened to her is she had been put under investigation. She had been taken out of work for many weeks. And turns out they didn't even do the investigation, and she didn't do anything wrong. And so they're like, okay, you can go back to work. But in the meantime, she had lost a lot of income, right? So she went to the union and asked them, hey, could you help me get my income back? Because you're my representative, and when a union represents employees at a work site, whether they're members or not, they have the legal obligation to help those employees whenever they have discipline or anything like that. So she asked the union. The union said, no, we're not really going to help you out because you're not a member. And that's like patently illegal. So she came to us, and we were able to take her case, and we won for her at the lower courts, and then the union appealed to the state Supreme Court. They took the case. And kind of on a hunch, we were like, well, let's look at the campaign finance records here. So we did. And 6 out of the 7 justices on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had taken altogether $5 million from organized labor. That's a pretty good amount of money, right? Well, those same 6 out of 7 had taken over 6 figures in money just from the union that my client was up against. And not just the union, but the union's attorneys and the union's law firm. So you're, public employee, make $45,000. You're against this union. They pay their president 6 times that much, and they've given a lot of money to 6 out of the 7 justices you're in front of. Usually at this part in the story, people are like, how's this going to be fair? I don't know. That's probably a pretty good question. So being the lawyers that we are, we did something I've never done before, which was to ask the 6 justices to recuse themselves. And Exhibit A was one of the justices in the Ask Me Counsel 13 t-shirt, the green t-shirt, double thumbs up, big smile in his campaign offices. And that was literally the union we're against, right? So we sent that in. We're like, well, surely at least he will see the wisdom probably in recusing himself because of that. You may have guessed by now, nope, all 6 said, we're good. No problems here, guys. So all 6 of them, including then the 7th, heard oral arguments from us 2 months ago. We don't know how that's all going to pan out, obviously, but that story is just to set the stage for this is where we are in the modern day with public sector unions and kind of how they get involved in everything. It's not just the judiciary, it's the legislative branches and the executive branches as well. We're going to kind of go through that and give you some examples there. But first, just to give you an idea of where we're going to go for the rest of the day, I want to give you kind of an overview just really quickly of the difference between private sector unions and public sector unions because the difference is significant and I think it really matters to what we're going to be talking about today. We're then going to jump into kind of the history. I am, just so you know, not a historian. I admire historians for their grasp of dates, names, details like that. I'm a practitioner, and that's kind of how I'm going to look at it. But to understand where we are, we do have to see our history a little bit and how we got there. So, and we're going to see how, there were presidents from both sides of the aisle that differed in opinion on whether we should have even public sector unionism and collective bargaining or not. So it's going to be pretty interesting that way. And then we're going to bring us up to the current modern day, and we're going to talk about where we are, kind of the influence, and the things that go on these days. Maybe you'll hear some things you know, maybe you'll hear some things you don't know. Hopefully you leave with a pretty holistic view, and we're going to try to do that all in 20 minutes. So. Lawyers have never been accused of being quick on things, but I'm going to work at it. So first, kind of your difference between your public sector and your private sector unions. I like to explain it like this. So in the private sector, you have a business owner and you have your employees and your union, right? Pretty simple. You're trying to make a profit, and the company is thinking about how do we pay people, how do we make profit, how do we make our product, and continue going on. The union and the employees, they're negotiating for a portion of that profit. And so there's really a tension there, because if the union and the employees make kind of outrageous demands, say we want 60 days off a year, all of us want to make $500,000 at least, and we all want our own company car, right? Well, even if the business owner may want to do that, probably what you're going to hear back is, I could do that, but then you have no company to show up to, so none of that matters anyway, right? And so there's a really natural tension because you're dealing with profits and real money and a company, that type of thing. If you look in the public sector, though, and I like to use a school district as an example because we all kind of know how these run, and you elect your school board members, and oftentimes the teacher union of choice will get involved in that and try to get people elected who they want on the school board. And then they go in and they negotiate their collective bargaining agreement, the contract, with all the terms and conditions of employment, what we pay people, how they get off, take days off, that type of thing. Well, you don't really have so much of that tension because the school board members who have been supported by the union will often be like, well, I do like my position. You helped me get here and you've been very supportive. And so it's not really my money. It's just taxpayer dollars. So sure, I'll sign that and give it to you. And then the union gets what they want. And in a way, the union and the employer kind of cozy up together. And that's very different from I think you can see in the private sector where there's some tension where like, hey, we've got to make a living, right? We have to make some decisions here. And if you think I'm exaggerating that, I will give you just one example from just a couple months ago. I was talking to a gentleman in Florida, and he was telling me, because I was kind of telling him this example, and he's like, oh, that happened to me. He's like, I was a commissioner, and I was newly elected, and it came time to negotiate the collective bargaining agreement, and the union official just wandered in, had the contract, slid it across the table, said, hey, why don't you go ahead, sign that, I can get out of here. And he was like, well, I wasn't really beholden to the union, so I decided to look at it and started asking questions. And he said the union official was just irate at me that I would question anything. He said, that's not how we do this. You just sign it, and I leave. So this really happens, guys. This is how this business works. And so I think that the really important thing to take from this, too, is that when public sector unions are negotiating for higher wages or benefits, something like that, it's inherently political because they're basically trying to figure out how they can get more taxpayer dollars and then use that taxpayer dollars for other things, right? Again, different from private sector where you have private income, private money being used. So other things that, just to give you an idea about collective bargaining, as I said earlier, the union speaks for all the employees. The employees cannot go to their employer and say, hey, I'm a pretty good employee. Can I get a raise? Something like that. My employees, I have a couple here today, they could come to me and say, I'm a great employee. I'm going to leave if you don't give me a raise. Hopefully they don't. But, and then as a business owner, you have a decision where you can say, well, you're really not that good of an employee, so see ya. Or you can say, oh, yeah, we are going to work with you to keep you, right? But that doesn't happen in collective bargaining because the union has already predetermined your salary. It's usually your seniority plus your education level, and it's just a scale. And I think one of the examples of the weird ways that plays out, I had a guy call me. He was a public school chemistry teacher. Up and coming. Everyone in the district knew that he was awesome, and the district really wanted to keep him. But he was new, so he was pretty low on seniority, didn't get paid a lot, probably could get picked off. And so the district came to him and said, hey, we've got a plan. We can't give you more money, salary-wise, because the union's already negotiated your pay. But what do you think about coaching cross-country, running? And my client said, why would I do that? And they said, well, because in the contract, we can give you $2,500 extra a year if you'll coach cross-country track. So we can get you more money. We want to keep you. He said, I've never run a day in my life. I've never coached across the country. I don't know anything about that. Who is this going to be good for? Definitely not the kids. Definitely not me. And so, but like, this is the weird way they were trying to reward a good employee, because there is no merit to these things. Collective bargaining is all preset and figured out. So I think it just really, one of the inherent problems in collective bargaining that you find, again, is that you can't reward the good employees, you can't discipline the bad employees. And that's just kind of a fundamental thing of collective bargaining. Another thing, collective bargaining makes it really hard sometimes to operate your business. And again, kind of getting to if you have employees that you may want to discipline or reward. I don't know if you guys have heard of the rubber rooms. Anyone hear of the rubber rooms? Back in 2009, a report came out that the New York City School District, when there were teachers that were brought up on misconduct, they couldn't be fired. They had to go through this whole process. So there were 6 rooms that were termed rubber rooms in the district that these teachers would get sent to. And they were told, like, read the newspaper, sleep, eat, play board games. We don't care, just don't go near the kids. And so you had, in 2009, 600 teachers from the district in these rooms. And their average stay there was 3 years. Now, they were getting seniority the whole time, they were getting paid, they were getting benefits while their whole system kind of worked out. During that time, that means New York City School District was missing 600 teachers. So you either had to hire more or class sizes went up. Again, really hurting the kids. So these are just some of the things, again, we're just scratching the surface a little bit, but these are just some of the things that come from collective bargaining. So historically, if we look at collective bargaining in the public sector, it was pretty much agreed that collective bargaining in the public sector was not a great idea, right? In the private sector, it has been around since like 1794. There was this great union called the Federal Society of Journeymen and Cordwainers. I thought that was a pretty fun one. And then in 1869, there was a union called the Knights of Labor. And then in 1886, American Federation of Labor. They are the AFL of the AFL-CIO. So it goes back pretty far. Private sector collective bargaining was really formalized in 1935 through the Wagner Act, and that really set up what you guys probably know now as the NLRA, the NLRB, just a really formal way of collective bargaining in the private sector. That was 1935. Along comes FDR in 1937, right? Just 2 years after. In his mind, there was no place for public sector collective bargaining. And we see that in 1937, like I mentioned, he was penning a letter. Why was he penning a letter? Because he had just been invited to the 20th annual convention by the National Federation of Federal Employees. And they wanted him to attend, and he was writing a letter declining. But not only did he just decline, he decided to put some more thoughts down on paper about what he actually thought about collective bargaining in the federal government. And I'm not going to try to summarize this. I'm just going to read it to you in FDR's words. Kind of a portion of that letter. He said, all government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into the public service. It has its distinct and insurmountable limitations when applied to public personnel management. The very nature and purposes of government make it impossible for administrative officials to represent fully or to bind the employer in mutual discussions with government employee organizations. The employer is the whole people who speak by means of laws enacted by their representatives in Congress. He went on to say that he was firmly against militant tactics that unions may take. These would be like strikes, walkouts, those types of things. And he further noted that action that seeks the paralysis of government by those who have sworn to support it is unthinkable and intolerable. And I think what he was getting at, in part, if you think about it, think about public employees, right? You have your first responders, teachers, your DMV workers, those types of nurses in hospitals sometimes. If they were to go on strike, that doesn't just hurt the bottom line of a corporation, that really hurts society as a whole, right? If your police said in downtown Pittsburgh, hey, enough of this, we're going on strike for 2 weeks, we're off the streets. That's just like a big, hey, rob me now sign, right? And that might be like the least of the damage that happens. And so FDR really understood this system can't be transplanted from the public into the private with good results. So kind of moving forward from that, there was an AFL-CIO president, George Meany, in 1955. So this is, FDR said that, I think, in 1937. Move forward to 1955. It was still the thought by a prominent labor official. His quote is, "It is impossible to bargain collectively with the government," right? So this was across the board. Everyone kind of understood this and thought this to be true. Along comes JFK, though, and he may have had different thoughts on this. And he really was the one that kind of brought collective bargaining in the public sector in vogue, really, and started kind of the trend and the momentum for it. And so in 1962, he signs an executive order, 10-988, and that really said, we can now collectively bargain in the federal government. Federal government employees now have collective bargaining rights. They can have input into the terms and conditions of employment through the union, those types of things. Interestingly, right after his inauguration, he actually sent a telegram to one of the major federal government employee unions and said, hey, I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. We're going to have a good time. Maybe not that part, but, we're going to work together and collaborate. And sure enough, a couple years later, he delivered on that with his executive order. How interesting, right? Going back to the tension where you have business owner, union, you have president, head of the executive branch telling the union, hey, look forward to working with you guys. This is going to be great. So again, we're looking at our tensions here. It's a little bit different in the public sector. So he signs his executive order. It gives them collective bargaining rights in the federal government, and so we're off to the races. And then we have a string of presidents afterwards that basically, the term, hey, hold my beer. Well, that's basically what they're saying, although they didn't say that back then. But so in 1969, you had Nixon. He was like, hey, I'm going to do my own executive order. I'm going to expand their bargaining rights a little bit more. So he does. And then Gerald Ford gets into the party in 1975, and he actually expands Nixon's executive order, builds it out a little bit more. And then in 1978, President Carter, this was kind of like the capstone of this all, he signs the Civil Service Act, and that really put into place your modern day collective bargaining in the federal government. It was basically, it was analogous to the NLRB and the NLRA. So Carter kind of like put the final stamp on it and gave like full collective bargaining rights. So what they were really hoping for, though, in Kennedy's era was that his executive order would be kind of a blueprint for not just how we do things at the federal government level, but how are we going to then collectively bargain with states and local municipalities and counties and all these types of things. And that actually ended up becoming true because momentum was picked up, and especially through the late 60s and 70s, a lot of states started passing their own collective bargaining for public sector employees. So now let's switch to kind of our next segment where we're going to look at, okay, so this is how we've gotten here, and let's see the growth and where we are today. So today, there are about 7 million public sector employees who are unionized, and that's really only about 32% of the public sector workforce. So remember what I said in the beginning, part of why I like this is because it's working in an area where these unions don't really represent a large portion of society or our population, but they have a real outsized influence in a lot of ways. So, 7 million employees, that sounds significant, but it's only 32% of the public sector workforce is unionized. In 2009 is really where we kind of saw the cross in the graph, where there became more public sector employees unionized than private sector employees unionized. And if you break it down, it's about, of all the unionized public sector employees, about a third is in local government, a third is in state, and a third is in the federal government. But there's a really wide variation in the states as to, how unionized it is. So, for instance, Connecticut has about 67% of their employees that are unionized. North Dakota, I don't know if anyone wants to guess, but it's 0.57%. Not much going on in North Dakota. They're pretty free of unionization up there. But this kind of then transitions into, okay, so those are the numbers, but these unions have really built themselves into these really serious political power players and power brokers. And again, we could do hours, and I'm not going to because I promised 20 minutes, maybe 30, but we're just going to skim some facts here and just give you kind of a taste of what they're into and what they're doing. So close to home, during the 2023-2024 filing period, you had government unions, for instance, the Pennsylvania State Education Association, PSEA, AFT, American Federation of Teachers, AFSCME, who I told you about in my earlier story, and SEIU. They put $33.5 million into Pennsylvania politics. That was just like in one filing period, guys. In the Shapiro versus Mastriano campaign, again, don't care who you voted for, who you liked or didn't like, doesn't matter. These are just facts. The public sector unions put $5.5 million towards Shapiro. They put $1,000 towards Mastriano. Interestingly, once Shapiro was elected, in 2023, new CBAs were negotiated, say, with AFSCME, SEIU, those folks. And it turns out that there was a 22% wage increase over the next 4 years negotiating to those CBAs. I'm not going to draw any lines, but it seems kind of interesting to me. If you want to take their own words for it, in 2022, SEIU, when they were doing their endorsement of Shapiro, they said the SEIU Pennsylvania State Council is the third largest union in Pennsylvania, representing 80,000 workers across the Commonwealth, and one of the most powerful political organizations in the state. So they're not like being secret about this. This is how they see themselves. And this isn't like the PAC they were talking about. It's the union as the organization. But it's not just financial resources, it's personnel as well. When Governor Wolf took office, his chief of staff was the former national campaign manager for SEIU, and his Department of Labor secretary was straight out of the PSEA, their former president. Going national, Biden, who said, I'm going to be the most labor-friendly president there's ever been. He appointed Marty Walsh as his Department of Labor secretary initially, the first former union official to hold that post. Marty then bailed and went and became the president of the NHLPA, probably a lot more fun, so who knows. But, and then, oh man, I had another fun one here. Oh, so this one, it's the New Jersey Education Association, and I don't know where to categorize this. So the union's president is running for governor, and thus far, he has only used about $40 million of his union's dues money to support his campaign. So who knows? I think there's more to come, too, from all indications. Of course, if you've been paying attention to judicial elections around the country, which I don't blame you if you haven't, because it's not that fun, but in Wisconsin, about $100 million was spent, labor unions being a portion of that. And then we all love Illinois, right? They have some of the best stories. The Illinois SEIU, They collected in 2024 $3 million in dues. They spent $1.8 million of that, and $1.2 million of that was on not representing people. It was spent on political activities and lobbying. 3% of that was actually spent on representational activities, which is like what they say they actually do. $279,000 of that, just to give you an idea of kind of how the money funnels in other ways, was shipped out under contributions and grants. Well, let's take a look at one of those grants. There was a grant for $7,500 that went to an organization that works to defeat bills that limit girls' sports to biological females. So the union's pushing its policies directly, indirectly. The point is they're spending a lot of money having influence on culture and society. And when it's public sector unions, it's taxpayer dollars. That's what you got to remember. At the end of the day, it's taxpayer dollars that's getting shipped around the country into these elections and campaigns. I have a section, radical agendas. Let's cover that real quick. So NEA, National Education Association, they adopted a resolution to have a team of staffers for members who want to learn more about critical race theory and to provide a study that critiques, among other things, capitalism and other forms of power and oppression. The NJEA, the one with the governor using all the dollars to run for governor, or the president using all the dollars running for governor, at their yearly convention, they hosted a drag queen story hour. So, again, maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but the point is, this isn't about terms and conditions of employment and representing, the teachers. It's much larger than that. It's about pushing agendas, pushing priorities of the union, and these things get pushed down into culture and society across the board because they're big-time players. They play at a high level. I have a whole section here on corruption, but I want to leave some time for Q&A. But basically, I think the point with union corruption, if you think the mob is dead, it's not. I can give you a lot of fun stories, maybe when we're off the camera, of that. But the point is, maybe the unions aren't always held as accountable as they should be because the people who they help elect are the ones who should enforce the laws, if you think what I'm saying here, right? I'll give you one example. We had a guy call. He had offended the president of his union because he thought he wasn't doing a good job and maybe said maybe we should have a different union. President sends his henchman, hits the guy with a car. The guy goes to the hospital. When he gets out of the hospital, he goes down to the police and said, we all know who did this. Yes, we know who did this. He's like, well, are you going to go arrest them? He's like, nah, we're not going to get them. They do that all the time when they're mad. That was the police. This was a prominent city in the U.S. We won't name names. But that's the type of stuff that's going on, and I've got tons of stories like that. So other things we've found in our cases when we've done this, unions using members' dues for NFL tickets, flying their girlfriends and fiancés to tropical islands, PGA Tour level golf round. I love to golf, but maybe you shouldn't use taxpayer dollars at the end of the day to send yourself on a golf trip. We have one union that was paying hush money and was paying for hookers and strippers. I mean, these guys have a good time, and it's all on the taxpayer dime when it's public sector. So we'll stop there for now. The corruption part's kind of fun. I get passionate about it. But I think if we can conclude, to bring us back to the early story that I told about our client Penny Gustafson at the Supreme Court, what we're seeing today is significant resources spent to have significant power and influence at the highest levels across our government. And that's how you end up with my client who, made $40-some thousand a year against a massive union with millions upon millions of dollars who had given significant money to 6 out of the 7 justices that were going to hear her case. And that, to me, kind of just sums this all up in a way. So anyway, I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them. If not, we can get into maybe like the Steelers quarterback debate, because that would be fun. I feel like there's a lot to say there. So in any event, thank you guys so much, and look forward to your questions.
We don't have a microphone, so if you have a question, please stand up at your chair and voice it as loud as possible. So we've got one here. Go ahead.
Hey, Nick, how do right-to-work laws impact public sector collective bargaining? Or do they? I don't know that area long very well.
Yeah, so the right-to-work concept is basically that if you're not a union member, you don't have to pay the union anything. So you don't have to pay them fees, you don't have to pay them dues. That largely exists now only in the private sector, because in the public sector, there was a Supreme Court case in 2018 called Janus v. AFSCME, and the ruling there was that it was unconstitutional to have non-member employees that were basically forced to be represented by the union to have to pay them any fee for that service, because it kind of goes back to what I was saying, where everything that unions do in the public sector is inherently political, because they're making decisions with taxpayer resources, government resources, which belong to you. And so the Supreme Court said, we're going to end that. Non-members no longer have to pay any type of fee to the union. So it basically put the right-to-work concept throughout the country into the public sector. So the public sector doesn't need to worry about right-to-work laws anymore in that sense.
With all your experience and example, when does your book come out?
I've actually been asked that before. I don't know. We'll have to find some time. We'll have to change a lot of names. Oh man, Coach Dreves.
Big country, lot of cases. So how do you filter, like, first of all, how do you get your information and make sure it's accurate for all these cases around the country? And how do you guys filter which ones you're interested in taking on and which ones you aren't?
Yeah. So at our firm, we do take cases across the country, and like you're saying, when we get an initial call, we literally have people hired to do an intake. Sometimes they'll be on the phone with someone for 2 to 3 hours and just getting as many details as we can. Then we have backup people who then go and verify the accuracy of what we've been told. We try to get all the underlying documents, so that, because a lot of times, this is a confusing area of law, and a lot of times people will tell you something and your gut's kind of like, that's not really how this works. And so you go behind and get the actual contract, or you get the MOU or constitution and bylaws of the unions, if you can, handbooks, those types of things, and you try to figure it all out. And once you understand what you're looking at, that's then when you can determine whether there would be a good case here or not. Our public interest firm's a little bit different than some. Some public interest firms are like, we just want that one case, and we won't take any other case until we find like that perfect set of facts. For us, our strategy is the states that we're in, we plant long-term, and so we want to file repetitive cases, because we want to continue to change the labor culture for our clients. And so we'll file pretty much any case that has merit to it. We're not looking for like that one case. And that was very attractive to me, because in my younger years as a lawyer working for a different place, I was in California, and I was waiting for oral argument. And like I said, there's very few people in the country who do this. So you get to know the union's attorneys, and we're chatting, and I'm like, if your client would just stop doing this one thing, you would never see us anymore. And in an incredible moment of clarity or truth, I don't know, he said, well, Nathan, it's a business decision. He said, you guys show up every couple years, we moot out the case or it goes away, and then we make hundreds of thousands of dollars while you're gone, basically breaking this law. And I was like, well, good businessmen, I guess. But yeah, that kind of bothered me. And so when I came to the Fairness Center, our strategy is that's not going to happen anymore because we're going to file one case. And if you mute it out, guess what? We're filing another case and another case and another case until that policy and practice is changed or the court rules on it to give our client relief. So anyway, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Actually, public employees have dual protection. They have, not only do they have their unions to represent them, but they have civil service protection.
That's right, yeah.
So does civil service protection also, is it entangled with union conditions too?
In some ways, it kind of operates separately because the unions have their contract, and when whatever the situation is covered by the contract, then that's usually what gets enforced. And the civil service protections are kind of like the undergirding net that catches whatever the union wouldn't really represent them for. So.
I really love the name of the organization, and I think all of us want to support fairness. Could you tell us just a little more about the organization, and could you tell us one or two of those nearly perfect cases that brought a lot of media attention and that made everything all right and fair?
Sure. So the organization, the Fairness Center, we're a 501c3 public interest law firm, and we started here in Pennsylvania. Our flagship office is still in Harrisburg. We now operate in New York, Connecticut, at the federal government employee level, Colorado, and we have test cases in California, Florida, and New Jersey. So possible expansions there. We have 7 attorneys. We have a staff of 18 right now, and we're a bunch of hungry litigators, and we love our job that way. And so, sorry, your second part of your question was part of the case. So I'll tell you, so I'll tell you a recent case that was really fun for us and brought a great resolution. We had a public school teacher in Elk Grove in California, and he was getting nervous about and frustrated with how much DEI he was made to do training-wise and incorporate into the curriculum, those types of things. And so he thought this was a school board issue. So he would show up at the school board and say, hey, like, I really think this is taking away from us educating the kids. We're so tied up in this DEI stuff. He even did the calculations that if they had stopped investing in the DEI program, each teacher could get a $3,000 raise a year. That's how much the school district was investing and paying towards DEI. The school board says, get lost, get out of here. And what he really found out was it was the union's idea to do these trainings and to push this agenda and push it into the school district. And the school district was basically going along with it. So he said, I'm going to run for the union executive board and try to change this from the inside out. So he goes to run for the executive board seat that was up and finds out that he has to identify as a minority. Well, he's not, because he's white. So he literally couldn't run for a union executive board seat because of the color of his skin. And that is actually illegal under the Civil Rights Act, Title VII. And so he came to us and said, could you help me out here? And we looked into it, and we were like, well, no one's ever tried this before. It seems like the law is in your favor. Let's give it a go. So we filed it, and it ended up in federal court. And the union was like, charge forward, and then they brought in their big-time attorneys, and the attorneys were like, don't charge forward, stop. And so they actually asked the court to enter judgment against them. So there's actually a court order, a judgment against the union that the union had done wrong, and they actually had to pay our client $12,000, which he then gave to a scholarship fund, because for him, it was never about the money, it was about the principle of the matter. So and they had to promise not to do that anymore, which was like the big piece of that. So, yeah. Yep.
It sounds like our representatives don't really represent us, the taxpayer, at any level. Do you know of a good resource that would provide the information to people when they go to vote to understand the influence that is being put to bear on the people who are supposedly running to represent us?
I'd have to think about that. I don't know that there's an organization that is kind of like centralizing campaign finance records that you'd be able to look up and say, you know, like who's donating to this. I mean, it's all there. Like all the data's there. I just don't know if there's anyone kind of like combining it and centralizing it. Maybe not a bad idea for an organization to do that though.
We hear a lot about the federal debt crisis, but one thing I never hear about is the public unions complaining about pension funding. Now, for example, the Geezers, last time I looked at my wife's pension records, I think they're funded about 65%. The SEIU was really behind Sarah Morano, who's the county executive in Allegheny County, and also Nick Gainey, the mayor of Pittsburgh, and I forget which one of those funds, when I looked at it, I think they're funded about 45%. Why aren't the unions doing something to protect the retirees and their future retirees? This is a ticking time bomb that gets seated in no attention.
I would agree with you. Unions are very, pensions first. We actually had a case in Erie where they wanted to hang on to the pensions for their members so badly that they lied to their members about what the offer actually really was, but that's a different story for a different day. I don't know why this is going back actually to. So when I worked on Capitol Hill, I was a labor policy guy for a little while, and they do seem to care about it once there is like an absolute crisis. They would like call members of Congress together and the companies and the unions, and they'd figure it all out, probably costing the taxpayers more money at some point or another. But they seem to be really happy just to say, hey, we do pensions, but just to let it ride. I think part of it is because for real pension reform to happen, you have to get politicians to do something, and the unions in some ways benefit from a good relationship with politicians, so they don't really push each other real hard either way. And so I think that's why it takes crisis to kind of realize that, some relief there. So it's not a great answer, but that's kind of where I see it. So.
Well, we're out of time. Please help me thank Nathan for